So this is part two for Parashat Va'era. And in the previous video, we sort of presented our questions about the Tanchuma, and I will try and take them apart. Now, obviously, the main issue over here, the central thing we need to start from, is understanding the meaning of God's names. So I'll start over here with something that's very well known. It's used in many, many contexts, but the idea is that God's names reflect the way that He is interacting with the world. And the very, very basic division is between Shem Elokim and Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei, where Elokim reflects God working through the laws of nature or the laws of history, only intervening or affecting things through natural means. Okay, and Yud Kei Vav Kei refers to God intervening by sort of breaking those rules and directly tinkering with what is happening in the world. So Yud Kei Vav Kei, for example, is when we associate with Hashgacha Pratit, where God will directly sort of give you what you deserve, even if it's against the laws of nature, and do these big miracles. And Shem Elokim is when God will sort of work through the natural ways that the world works in order to achieve whatever goals He's trying to achieve. And these broad categories also associate with other things. So, for example, one thing we see over here is how Shem Elokim associates with din, with the judgment, with the rule of law, okay, and Rachamim, and Yud Kei Vav Kei associates with Rachamim, with mercy, because when I'm merciful, I'm going outside the law, and I'm giving you stuff because I believe you deserve it, but not even because you deserve it, but because I want to give it to you, because I'm trying to be merciful. Okay? And these ideas, as you will see, will be very, very strong, will be featured very prominently in our discussion here today. So now that we understand that, let's try and see what's happening here. So the Midrash starts off by saying that saying God's name phonetically is a problem, and so much of a problem that it's bundled up with the Apikoros and other bad personas. So why is that? So it would seem that Yud Kei Vav Kei, unlike Elokim is a generic name for God, whereas Yud Kei Vav Kei is our God's name. Okay, we can say Elokim Acharim, other gods, other idols, false idols, but we don't say other Yud Kei Vav Keis. Okay, there's no such other Hashems. There's only one Hashem. That's our God. So that's sort of like His personal name. And I think we can see the connection and say anybody who says God's name, when you say God's real name directly, it's also sort of similar to a guy walking into the Holy of Holies, to Kodesh HaKodashim, that's not supposed to. Okay, you're basically getting directly in touch with who God really is. The reason that's God, that God's name is associated with Midat Rachamim and that stuff is because that's where God appears, right? We're talking about the cases where God breaks the rules of reality. So when we see a deviation from the laws of the world, that's where we see God, right? Because even though God is everywhere and He's also behind regular laws, we don't see Him when we see just the laws many times. Even though we know that He's there. Where do we see God or think that we see Him? Right? Obviously we can't see the infinite, but we notice His existence when He breaks those laws. And so when you say God's name, it's as if you're getting really, really close to something so immense and powerful that it's bad, right? You shouldn't do that. You don't deserve, you're not worthy of being so close. So we have to take some distance, okay, from God. Just like we don't walk into the Holy of Holies with our physical bodies, with our language, with our ideas, we have to also have some sort of distance. And that's also the same idea that's expressed immediately afterwards. Yeah? Amar ben Azai, that God didn't bring His name into the world until He had some sort of a buffer. Right? Shem Elokim appeared after two words. And then Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar mentions that Shem Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, when Moshe sings in Ha'azinu, appears only after 21, not 2 verses, after 2 words, and Yud Kei Vav Kei appeared after 21 words in Moshe's words, and Moshe was singing Ha'azinu. So again, we see this need for a buffer. Okay, we can't just approach the God's name directly. We need some space, because Yud Kei Vav Kei is basically the name attached to the infinite, and the finite, us, cannot be sort of like in the midst, with the infinite in the same plane. We need to have some sort of a buffer. And now we can start understanding the next part. So he says, God didn't reveal his name to the patriarchs, only to Moshe, and that also only because he needed to take the people of Israel out of Egypt. So what does that mean? First of all, we see the buffering effect again, right? In the history of the world, or the history of the people of Israel, Abraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov were not revealed to. They were not revealed with the name Yud Kei Vav, okay? But Moshe was. So you see a buffer, right, over time. And why was Moshe? Not because he was more worthy than them. He wasn't on a personal level more worthy. Because God needed to. Because God couldn't use the standard laws of the world to extract the people of Israel from Egypt. By the natural laws, they were slaves. They should remain slaves forever, right? Or practically forever. In order to remove them at that point, God had to do something that was extraordinary, that was out of the rules of the nature. So he had to reveal himself with Yud Kei Vav Kei. In fact, this is a very interesting point. The Ramban, if you look at him on this verse, talks about how what does this mean? He says, even though God revealed himself to the Avot, he never changed the laws of nature for them. And this is actually a very interesting observation, that if you look at the stories in Bereshit, you'll see that this is true. Whatever miracles God did to the Avot, most of them had to do with predicting the future, and they never were sort of saved by any kind of explicit miracle. Like Abraham charges the 4 kings with 300 men and wins, but you can attribute that to tactics, to guerrilla warfare, to all sorts of things. But there's no miracle. There's no big fire that's showers down on our enemies. And the Avot had to deal with things in the real world, and that's also the examples we gave you before of having to buy the land, etc., etc. So you can see how this is changing now. Suddenly there are going to be miracles, and the miracles are going to be the ones that will, all the 10 plagues and the ripping open of the Red Sea, and countless miracles that we're about to see over the story, over Sefer Shemot, and until we get into Israel. So, so you can see that there's a big change in the way God manages the world. And now we can start. And now we hear, have this whole thing where God says, well, Moshe, why are you complaining? Look, you're being given this great moment of being exposed to my real name in this world. Am I doing miracles? Yeah, and and you're complaining. Look, the other Avot only saw one facet of me, only saw the Elohim side of me, and they were fine. When they had to deal with challenges, they were not. You are not, being thankful enough and not appreciative enough of being exposed to this new level of my appearance in the world. And so you'll be punished. Now, first of all, when we see that Moshe is being punished to go into Israel, I don't know, one of the first things that comes to my mind is like, oh great, not again. Meaning almost every time we see a little thing with Moshe, you see people trying to sort of, attach it to not going into Israel, right? There's so many sins that we've concocted over the years of Moshe not being able to go into Israel, and why he deserved that. So we're going to have to do that again here too. But it's important to realize that almost all these explanations really have some sort of 1 or 2 core points that they're pointing to, which have to do with Moshe's character and Moshe's nature of interaction with God. So what really is going on over here? What was Moshe's problem, right? I mean, why wasn't he patient? You can say he wasn't as great as the patriarchs. They had more staying power. They weren't so quick to give up. Why is Moshe giving up? I mean, you could say that, but let's look for a deeper reason. I think that the answer is exactly it's sort of encoded in this very difference in the way that God is interacting with the world. And I think this now gets us back to the beginning and also shows a very deep insight into these two different names. You would think, says Moshe, that if God is working through Yud Kei Vav Kei, if God is working through His name, His explicit name, where He can break the laws of reality and do whatever He wants in reality, nothing should be keeping Him back. Why should we have to wait? Just go, take Him out, let's go. Right? I mean, I'm going to go to Paro, I'll tell him I have to go. God will make him let them go, and we'll go. I mean, why do we have to wait? What's the reason? If you're doing with Shem Elohim, I understand. Because you're working through the laws of nature, you're working through the laws of the world, and what would you expect? You'd expect things to take time because that's how the world works, right? You can't just get everything immediately. But if you do things but if you're doing things using miracles, and you're unbounded in your ability to do miracles, because God can do anything He wants, then why does that have to take time? Why should I have to wait? I mean, just do it. Just take us out, rip open the sea, kill all the Egyptians, and let's go. Freeze them in place. I mean, I'm sure that there's plenty of movies you can take good ideas from. And that's what Moshe is bothered by. Moshe is saying, come on, you told me it's going to happen, why isn't it happening? If it was Shem Elohim, I'd understand, but it's Yud Kei Vav Kei. Come on, just change the laws of reality and let us out. So why are we waiting, right? And so Hashem is saying to Moshe, and so he's berating him and saying, look, these your predecessors, the patriarchs, they had patience, they were able to learn with it. But it's not only about patience. What did they do? They took initiative, right? They realized that that they had to interact with the world when things didn't go the way that they wanted them to be. And what is the message? He's saying basically, you should know, Moshe, that even with Yud Kei Vav Kei, even when I directly interact in the world still has to respond. Miracles aren't just technical events where I change the world. They are always, whether they're done with one name or another name, they are always a challenge. They're always a question mark for reality. And then there's the question of, what are you going to do about it? Here's what I put out there. How are you going to respond? We see this very clearly when they try to cross the Red Sea. And Moshe tells the people of Israel, don't worry, Hashem yilachem lachem v'atem techarishun. God will fight for you and you'll just be quiet. You'll just sit back and wait for things to happen. And God turns to Moshe and tells him, Ma titzak elai, daber b'nei Yisrael v'Esau. What are you calling to me? Just move. Meaning, if you start moving, I'll open the sea, but you got to do something. Don't expect me just to... It's not that I'm going to do everything and you're just going to be completely passive. You need to take initiative. You need to be active over here. And this is also why Moshe can't go into Israel. Because the move from being in the desert to being in Israel, it's not only that there's many changes, but one of them is clearly that you need more initiative in order to move. Even if God is the one who's doing all these miracles, even if He opens up the Jordan River and He brings down the walls of Jericho, the people need to be active. They have to be willing to fight. And if Moshe can't be a leader that does that, then he should be in Israel. Now, it's not that he can't be personally in Israel, but he can't lead them in Israel. And so I wanted so this is already the idea, and it's already we're close to the end of the video. I don't want to keep you here too long. I'll just summarize by saying this. This is a very important message. Even when God does miracles, even when God breaks the laws of reality to do a miracle, they're never a done deal. They're never sort of gift wrapped and said, that's it, you don't have to do anything. It's always a challenge. It's always saying, here's a miracle with potential. How are you going to use it? That's true for sure when He works through the normal laws of the world, where we're expected to take part in that. But the big chiddush of the Midrash is, it's true always. There's always that buffer. You're never just there with God. You're never just at the end. There's always some sort of a path you need to traverse. Okay? Some gap that you need to close. Yeah? Only when you're worthy can you fully close it and sort of, and make the most of it. But, that's the big message. God will reveal Himself in Midat HaRachamim and change the rules of reality, but we need to know how to take part in that miracle as well. Shabbat Shalom.